The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain of the Oregon Trail as Molly Harrington watched her last drop of water splash into the parched earth. It was June 1853, and what had begun as a journey of hope had quickly descended into a desperate struggle for survival. The wagon train she had joined in Independence, Missouri, 3 months prior was now scattered, decimated by cholera and Indian attacks. Not much farther to the next watering hole, Molly whispered to herself, though her cracked lips barely formed the words. At 22, she had once been full of vigor and determination, but days without proper food and water had left her body weak and her spirit faltering. The distant sound of hoofbeats made Molly turn, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol tucked in her skirt pocket, her father's parting gift before she left their Pennsylvania home. A lone rider approached, his tall silhouette backlit by the morning sun. As he drew closer, Molly could make out his features, a weather-beaten face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, a strong jaw lined with several days' growth of beard, and eyes the color of a stormy sky. "Madam," he called out, tipping his hat as he reined his horse to a stop, "you're a fair distance from any settlement. The name's Benjamin Drake. Most folks just call me Ben." Molly straightened her back despite her exhaustion. "Molly Harrington. I was with the Simmons wagon train, but we were separated during a dust storm 3 days ago." Ben dismounted, his movements fluid despite his large frame. "The Simmons train? I passed what was left of them yesterday, headed for Fort Laramie. They've had a rough go of it. Then they're alive?" Relief washed over Molly, quickly followed by a wave of dizziness that sent her staggering. Ben stepped forward, catching her elbow. "Whoa there. When's the last time you had water, Miss Harrington?" "Yesterday morning," she admitted. "My canteen sprung a leak, and I've been trying to conserve what little I had." Ben unhooked a water skin from his saddle and offered it to her. "Drink slowly. Too much at once will make you sick." Molly took careful sips, the lukewarm liquid feeling like heaven against her parched throat. "Thank you, Mr. Drake." "Ben," he corrected. "And it's no trouble. Can't leave a lady stranded in the wilderness. Where's your wagon?" Molly gestured toward a small rise about half a mile back. "Axle broke 2 days ago. I've been carrying what I could and walking toward Fort Laramie." Ben's eyebrows rose. "That's another 40 miles, Miss Harrington." "Molly," she said, returning his earlier informality. "And I'm aware of the distance, but I didn't see much choice in the matter." Ben surveyed the surrounding landscape, his eyes narrowing against the brightening sun. "I'm headed to Fort Laramie myself. Was planning to be there by nightfall tomorrow." "Then please, don't let me delay you," Molly said, though the thought of being alone again made her stomach clench. "I'm grateful for the water." "Now hold on," Ben said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not suggesting I leave you here. I'm suggesting we travel together." Molly hesitated. Her father had warned her about the dangers a woman faced alone on the frontier, especially from men with questionable intentions. But there was something about Ben Drake's direct gaze that inspired trust rather than fear. "I would be grateful for the company," she finally said. "Good. Let's gather your belongings from your wagon. Then we'll be on our way." The walk back to her abandoned wagon was harder than Molly had anticipated. Each step seemed to drain what little energy the water had restored. By the time they reached the wagon, her legs were trembling with fatigue. Ben noticed her distress. "You need rest and food before we go any further." He helped her sit in the shade of the broken wagon, then retrieved some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," Molly admitted, taking small bites of the jerky. "Why were you traveling with the Simmons train?" Ben asked as he inspected the wagon's contents. "Most folks don't undertake this journey alone." Molly swallowed hard. "My parents died of fever last winter. My uncle in Oregon Territory offered me a place to stay, a chance to start fresh. The Simmons family agreed to let me travel with them in exchange for helping with the children." Ben nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Lost my own folks young. Been on my own since I was 16, working cattle drives mostly. Heading to Oregon myself, got an offer to help start a ranch near the Willamette Valley." "It seems we're both seeking new beginnings," Molly said softly. Ben began sorting through her belongings. "We'll take what we can carry. The horse can bear some weight, but we need to travel light." After they had packed the essentials, Molly's clothing, a small trunk of family mementos, and the few supplies that remained, Ben helped her to her feet. It was then that her exhaustion fully caught up with her, and her knees buckled. Ben caught her before she fell. "Miss Harrington, Molly, you're in no condition to walk." "I'll be fine," she insisted, though the world was spinning around her. "Just need to catch my breath." Ben shook his head, his expression resolute. "You've grown too weak to walk the trail. I'll carry you until your strength returns." "I couldn't possibly. It's not up for debate," Ben said firmly. "Either I carry you, or we may camp here for days until you recover. And we don't have supplies for that." Before Molly could protest further, Ben had scooped her into his arms. She was surprised by how easily he lifted her, as though she weighed no more than a child. "You can't carry me all the way to Fort Laramie," she objected, though she couldn't deny the relief of being off her feet. "Not planning to," Ben replied, settling her onto his horse. "You'll ride Sergeant here for a while. I'll lead him on foot." "Sergeant?" Molly asked, running her hand along the horse's mane. "Army surplus," Ben explained with a slight smile. "Bought him off a discharged cavalryman in St. Louis. He's seen his share of trails." As they set off, Molly couldn't help but study her unexpected companion. Ben Drake was not what she would call handsome in the traditional sense, but there was something compelling about his rugged features and the quiet confidence in his movements. His shoulders were broad beneath his worn leather vest, and his hands, though calloused and rough, handled the reins with surprising gentleness. They traveled until midday, when the sun was high overhead and the heat became oppressive. Ben led them to a small stand of cottonwood trees beside a dry creek bed. "We'll rest here for an hour or so," he said, helping Molly down from the horse. "The worst of the day's heat will pass, and you can regain some strength." Molly sank gratefully onto the ground beneath the trees, leaning her back against a trunk. "I've slowed you down considerably," Ben shrugged, unsaddling Sergeant to give the horse a break. "I'm in no particular rush. The ranch will still be there when I arrive." "Tell me about it," Molly said, eager to keep conversation flowing to distract from her discomfort. "Not much to tell yet. The owner, Thomas Wilkes, is an old friend from my cattle driving days. He's got 500 acres of prime grazing land and a small herd to start, looking to expand." Ben pulled out his water skin and offered it to her again. "What about your uncle? What's waiting for you in Oregon?" Molly took a careful drink. "Uncle Henry has a general store in Oregon City. He says the territory is growing fast, and there's opportunity for a young woman willing to work hard. He mentioned teaching positions opening up as families settle in." "You're a teacher?" Ben asked, sounding impressed. "I was training to be one in Pennsylvania before my parents died." Molly twisted the plain gold ring on her right hand, her mother's wedding band, the only valuable thing she owned. "I was engaged to the son of another teacher, but after my parents passed, his family decided I wasn't a suitable match anymore. No dowry, you see." Ben's expression darkened. "Sounds like you're better off without a man like that." "Perhaps," Molly agreed, though the memory still stung. "It's all in the past now." As they continued their journey that afternoon, Molly insisted on walking for short stretches whenever she felt strong enough. Ben stayed close to her side, ready to catch her if she faltered. By evening, they had covered nearly 15 miles, not as far as Ben might have traveled alone, but respectable given the circumstances. They made camp beneath an overhanging rock formation that offered some protection from the wind. Ben built a small fire while Molly arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. "I hunted while you were resting earlier," Ben said, producing a pair of rabbits from his saddlebag. "Should make for a better meal than jerky." Molly watched as he skillfully dressed the rabbits and set them to cook over the fire. "You seem very capable in the wilderness, Mr. Drake." "Ben," he reminded her, "and I've had plenty of practice. 7 years on the frontier teaches a man what he needs to know to survive." "What made you leave home at 16? Molly asked, then immediately regretted her forwardness. "I apologize. That's a personal question." Ben was quiet for a moment, turning the rabbits to ensure even cooking. "My father was a drunk," he finally said. "After my mother died, he got worse. One night, he came at me with a knife. I defended myself, and when it was over, I decided it was time to move on. Headed west, and never looked back." The matter-of-fact way he delivered this tragic story made Molly's heart ache. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Made me who I am." Ben lifted the rabbits from the fire and handed one to Molly on a flat stone he'd cleaned. "Eat. You need your strength." The rabbit was delicious, or perhaps Molly was simply hungry enough that anything would have tasted wonderful. As they ate in companionable silence, the stars emerged overhead, a glittering tapestry against the vast darkness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ben said, following her gaze upward. "That's one thing I love about the frontier. You can see every star God put in the heavens." "It makes one feel rather small," Molly observed. "Or part of something much bigger," Ben countered. After they had eaten, Molly found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. The day's journey, though broken by rest periods, had depleted what little reserve she had. "Sleep," Ben said, noticing her struggle. "I'll keep watch for a while." "Wake me for my turn," Molly insisted, though she was already lying down on her bedroll. Ben's soft chuckle was the last thing she heard before drifting off. "Yes, madam." Molly awoke to the smell of coffee. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and Ben was already up, tending a small fire. "Good morning," he greeted her, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "How are you feeling?" Molly sat up, taking inventory of her body's aches and pains. "Better, I think, though still not at my best." "You'll get there." Ben handed her the coffee and a piece of hardtack. "We should reach a small creek by midday. Can refill our water there." As they packed up camp, Molly noticed Ben wincing when he lifted his saddle. "Are you hurt?" "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Old injury acts up sometimes." "From your time as a cowboy?" Ben nodded, securing the saddle on Sergeant. "Bull got the better of me during a roundup near Abilene. Broke 3 ribs and my shoulder. Healed well enough, but I feel changes in the weather these days." "You should have woken me from my watch," Molly chided gently. "You needed rest too." Ben's lips quirked into a half-smile. "You needed it more." They set off as the sun crested the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Molly insisted on walking for the first hour, determined to rebuild her strength. Ben matched his pace to hers, one hand never straying far from her elbow when the terrain grew uneven. By mid-morning, however, Molly was forced to concede defeat. Her legs trembled with each step, and dizziness threatened to overwhelm her. "I need to rest," she admitted reluctantly. Without a word, Ben swept her into his arms again. This time, rather than placing her on Sergeant, he carried her himself, cradling her against his chest. "The horse needs a break too," he explained when she protested. "Been carrying our supplies since dawn." Molly could feel the steady rhythm of Ben's heart beneath her cheek. His arms were solid and secure around her, and despite her embarrassment at being carried like a child, she couldn't deny the comfort she found in his embrace. "Tell me about Oregon," she said, hoping conversation would distract from their awkward position. "Have you been there before?" "Once, about 3 years back. It's green like you wouldn't believe after all this dust and rock. Trees taller than church steeples, and the rivers run clear and cold year-round. It sounds beautiful." "It is. Different from the plains, but beautiful in its own way." Ben adjusted his grip slightly. "You'll like it there, I think." "And will your ranch be near Oregon City?" Molly asked, trying to ignore the warmth that bloomed in her chest at the thought of seeing Ben after they reached their destination. "About a day's ride south. Close enough to visit town for supplies every few weeks. Perhaps I could visit your ranch someday, once I'm settled with my uncle." Ben glanced down at her, surprise, and something else, perhaps hope, in his eyes. "I'd like that." They continued in this manner for another hour before Ben finally set Molly down near a cluster of rocks. "Creek should be just over that rise," he said, pointing ahead. "Rest here while I scout ahead and refill our water." While Ben was gone, Molly took the opportunity to brush her hair and tidy her appearance as best she could with limited resources. She had never been a vain woman, but she suddenly found herself wishing for a mirror and perhaps a clean dress instead of the travel-stained garments she'd been wearing for days. Ben returned with full water skins and a handful of wild berries. "Found these growing near the creek," he said, offering them to her. "They'll help restore your strength." The berries were tart but refreshing, and Molly savored each one. "Thank you." They rested by the creek through the hottest part of the day. Molly took the opportunity to wash her face and hands in the cool water, while Ben tended to Sergeant and refilled their canteens for the journey ahead. "How much farther to Fort Laramie?" Molly asked as they prepared to set off again. "About 25 miles, Ben estimated." We should arrive by midday tomorrow if we keep a steady pace. Molly nodded, determination setting her jaw. I'll try not to slow us down. You're doing fine, Ben assured her. Better than most would in your situation. As they traveled through the afternoon, Molly alternated between walking and riding Sargent. Ben remained attentive, never straying far from her side when she walked, ready to catch her if she stumbled. By evening, they had made good progress, covering nearly 15 more miles. They made camp in a small valley sheltered by rocky outcroppings. Ben managed to shoot a grouse for their dinner, and Molly contributed by gathering wild onions she spotted growing near their campsite. Where did you learn to identify wild plants? Ben asked as they prepared the meal together. My mother taught me, Molly replied, chopping the onions with her small pocket knife. She was something of an herbalist. New remedies for everything from coughs to chilblains. Useful knowledge out here, Ben observed. Most city folks wouldn't know a medicinal herb from a poisonous one. I'm not most city folks, Molly said with a small smile. Ben's eyes crinkled at the corners as he returned her smile. No, you certainly are not. After dinner, they sat side by side near the fire, watching the flames dance in the growing darkness. The night was clear, the stars emerging one by one in the vast canvas above them. May I ask you something personal? Molly ventured after a comfortable silence. Ben nodded. Ask away. Why have you never married? A capable man like yourself must have had opportunities. Ben poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks swirling upward. There was someone once. Sarah was her name. Daughter of a rancher I worked for in Texas. We had plans to marry, but she took ill with fever. His voice grew quiet. Buried her 5 years ago come September. I'm sorry, Molly said softly, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. I shouldn't have pried. It's all right, Ben assured her, his hand briefly covering hers. What about you? Beyond your broken engagement, I mean. A beautiful woman like you must have had suitors. Molly felt heat rise to her cheeks, and it wasn't from the fire. There were a few interested parties, but none that interested me in return. My father used to say I was too stubborn for my own good, too set on finding a love match rather than a practical arrangement. And what do you think? Ben asked. I think, Molly said carefully, that life is too short and too hard to spend it with someone you don't truly care for. Ben's eyes met hers across the fire, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. On that, Miss Harrington, we are in complete agreement. That night, Molly slept soundly, more peacefully than she had since leaving Pennsylvania. Perhaps it was the improved food and rest, or perhaps it was the sense of security that Ben's presence provided. Whatever the cause, she woke feeling stronger than she had in days. The final stretch to Fort Laramie proved more challenging than anticipated. A summer thunderstorm blew in around mid-morning, turning the trail to mud and reducing visibility to mere yards. Ben fashioned a makeshift poncho for Molly from an oilskin tarp he carried in his pack, but both were soon soaked through despite their best efforts. We need shelter. Ben shouted over the howling wind, pulling Sargent to a stop. Can't risk hypothermia in this weather. He led them off the main trail, following what appeared to be a game path into a stand of trees. After several minutes of slow progress, they came upon an abandoned trapper's cabin. Its roof partially collapsed, but one corner still relatively intact. Ben helped Molly dismount and hurried her inside, while he secured Sargent in what remained of a lean-to attached to the cabin. The interior was dusty and smelled of mildew, but it was dry where the roof still held. We'll wait out the worst of it here, Ben said, shaking water from his hat. Storm like this usually passes quickly. Molly was shivering violently, her teeth chattering. I'm so cold. Ben frowned, concern etching lines around his eyes. We need to get you out of those wet clothes. Molly's eyes widened, and Ben quickly held up his hands. I'll step outside while you change into something dry from your pack. But you need to do it quickly. The longer you stay in wet clothing, the greater the risk. He turned his back while Molly fumbled with her pack, extracting her last clean dress, a simple brown cotton garment she'd been saving for her arrival at Fort Laramie. I can't unfasten my buttons, she admitted, her fingers too numb to work properly. My hands won't cooperate. Ben hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practical necessity. I can help, but only if you're comfortable with that. Molly swallowed hard. Under normal circumstances, she would never allow such familiarity, but these were hardly normal circumstances. "Please," she finally said. "I trust you." Ben turned slowly, his expression solemn. "Tell me if you want me to stop at any point." With gentle efficiency, he helped her out of her sodden dress, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible while still managing the task. Once she was changed into dry clothing, he wrapped his own relatively dry blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you," Molly whispered, clutching the blanket tightly. "I apologize for the impropriety." "Nothing improper about survival," Ben replied, though a flush had crept up his neck. "Now, let me see if I can get a fire going. There's an old stove in the corner that might still work." While Ben worked on the stove, Molly took inventory of the cabin. Despite its dilapidated state, it had clearly once been someone's home. A broken chair sat near the stove, and the remnants of a bed frame leaned against one wall. Shelves lined another wall, mostly empty save for a few dusty jars and a tattered book. "Look," she said, picking up the book carefully. "It's a Bible." Ben glanced up from the stove where he had managed to coax a small fire to life. "Seems appropriate. We could use some divine intervention about now." Molly opened the book gently, mindful of its fragile state. Inside the front cover, someone had written, "To Thomas and Mary, may God bless your new home. 1845. I wonder what happened to them," Molly mused. "Why they left their home and their Bible behind." "Hard to say," Ben replied, adding more wood to the growing fire. "Life out here isn't easy. Could be anything from illness to Indian troubles to simply giving up and heading back east." The stove soon radiated welcome heat, and Molly moved closer, extending her hands toward the warmth. Ben hung their wet clothing on nails protruding from the walls, hoping they might dry before they needed to depart. "Storm's not letting up," he observed, peering through a gap in the cabin's wall. "We might be here for a while." Molly nodded, no longer bothered by the delay. The cabin, for all its disrepair, felt like a sanctuary after days of exposure to the elements. "I'm just grateful for the shelter." Ben sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, but not so close as to be improper. "How are you feeling?" "Any warmer?" "Much better," Molly assured him. "Though I fear we've lost a day of travel." "Better to arrive late than not at all," Ben said pragmatically. "Besides, the extra rest will do you good. You've pushed yourself hard these past few days." "I've had excellent support," Molly replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me when you did." Ben looked away, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Molly said firmly. "Not anyone. Many would have ridden past or offered only minimal assistance before continuing on their way." "You've shown me extraordinary kindness, Ben Drake." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the steady drumming of rain on what remained of the cabin's roof. Molly found herself studying Ben's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his right eye that she hadn't noticed before, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, where it was still damp from the rain. "What will you do once you reach Oregon City?" Ben asked suddenly. "Beyond staying with your uncle, I mean." Molly considered the question. "Find work, I suppose. Teaching if possible, though I'd take any respectable position. Save money. Perhaps eventually have a place of my own." She paused. "What about you? Will ranching be your lifelong pursuit?" "It's what I know," Ben said with a shrug. "Though I've thought about settling down properly someday. Having a real home instead of just a bunk in a ranch house. Maybe even a family." "That sounds lovely," Molly said softly. Ben turned to face her fully. "Molly, I know we've only known each other a short while, but a sudden crash of thunder interrupted whatever he had been about to say, making both of them jump. Outside, Sergeant whinnied in alarm. Ben was on his feet instantly. "I'd better check on him. Make sure he hasn't broken loose." Left alone in the cabin, Molly pressed her hands to her cheeks, finding them warm despite the chill in the air. What had Ben been about to say? And why did her heart race at the possibilities? Ben returned a few minutes later, soaked once more, but with a smile on his face. "Sergeant's fine, just spooked by the thunder. And I've got good news, the storm's moving on. Skies clearing to the west." "That is good news," Molly agreed, though part of her couldn't help but wish for a few more hours in this unexpected haven with Ben. They departed the cabin an hour later, once their clothing had dried enough to be wearable again. The world outside was transformed muddy, yes, but also vibrant and fresh-washed, with sunlight breaking through the dissipating clouds. "We should still reach Fort Laramie by sundown if we push on," Ben said as he helped Molly mount Sergeant. "The rain will have softened the trail, which means easier going for a while." Molly nodded, though her mind was still preoccupied with Ben's unfinished statement from earlier. Had he been about to express feelings for her? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. They traveled in companionable silence for several miles, each lost in their own thoughts. Molly found her strength returning with each passing hour, enough that she insisted on walking alongside Ben for significant stretches. "You're looking stronger," Ben observed as they paused for a brief rest near midday. "Color's back in your cheeks." "I feel stronger," Molly confirmed. "Thanks to your care." Ben cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "About what I was saying back at the cabin, before the thunder interrupted, yes?" Molly prompted when he hesitated. "I know it's forward of me, and I've no right to ask, but I was wondering if you might consider." He trailed off, then took a deep breath and started again. "Would you allow me to call on you once we're settled in Oregon? Properly, I mean." Molly's heart soared at the formal request. "I would like that very much, Ben." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. That's good." They reached Fort Laramie just as the sun was setting, the military outpost a welcome sight after their arduous journey. The fort was bustling with activity, soldiers drilling in the yard, traders hawking their wares, and wagon trains preparing to depart or settle in for the night. As they approached the gates, Ben turned to Molly. "We should find you proper accommodations for the night. The fort keeps rooms for travelers, and they'll have a doctor who can check your condition." Molly nodded, though the thought of parting from Ben, even temporarily, caused an unexpected pang in her chest. "And you? Where will you stay?" "There's usually space in the barracks for male travelers, or I can camp outside the walls." Ben guided Sergeant through the fort's main gate, nodding to the soldiers on duty. "We should inquire at the commander's office first." The fort's commander, a Captain Wilson, was a gruff but kindly man who quickly arranged accommodations for Molly in the quarters reserved for women travelers. He also informed them that what remained of the Simmons wagon train had indeed passed through 2 days earlier, continuing westward after restocking supplies. They left a letter for a Miss Harrington, in case she arrived, the captain said, retrieving an envelope from his desk. Said they couldn't wait longer given the season and their supplies. Molly accepted the letter with mixed emotions. While she was glad to have news of the Simmons family, she couldn't help but feel somewhat abandoned, despite the logical reasons for their departure. "Thank you, Captain," she said. "Is there a doctor available? I've been unwell during the journey." "Doctor's making rounds now," Captain Wilson replied. "I'll send him to your quarters within the hour." Before they parted for the evening, Ben walked Molly to her assigned quarters, a small but clean room with an actual bed, a luxury that brought tears to Molly's eyes after so many nights on the ground. "The doctor will check on you soon," Ben said, hovering awkwardly at the doorway. "And I've arranged for a hot meal to be brought to you." "Thank you," Molly said, suddenly shy in the face of their imminent separation. "For everything." Ben shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I'll come by in the morning, if that's all right. We can discuss your options for continuing to Oregon City." "I'd like that." After Ben left, Molly sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past days. She opened the letter from the Simmons family, which expressed their regret at having to continue without her, but offered prayers for her safe arrival and invited her to join them in the Willamette Valley once she reached Oregon territory. The fort's doctor arrived shortly thereafter, a kindly older man who pronounced her suffering from exhaustion and mild dehydration, but otherwise in good health. "A few days' rest, good food, and plenty of water will set you right," he assured her. Molly slept deeply that night, the comfort of a real bed and the security of the fort walls allowing her to fully relax for the first time in weeks. She dreamed of green valleys and tall trees, and of Ben Drake smiling at her side. The next morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. Molly dressed in her cleanest remaining clothes and had just finished arranging her hair when a knock came at her door. Ben stood outside, freshly shaved, and wearing a clean shirt that made his eyes appear even more intensely blue. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I hope you slept well." Better than I have in months, Molly admitted. And you? Well enough. Ben offered her his arm. I thought you might join me for breakfast in the mess hall, if you're feeling up to it. Over a hearty meal of biscuits, bacon, and coffee luxuries after days of trail rations, Ben outlined the options for the remainder of their journey. There's a supply wagon leaving for Oregon City in 3 days, he explained. The captain says they'd be happy to have you along. It would be a safer journey than continuing on our own. Our own, Molly repeated, heart quickening. You'd still accompany me? Ben met her gaze steadily. If you'd allow it, yes. My arrangement with Wilkes isn't time-sensitive. I could see you safely to your uncle's door before heading to the ranch. I would appreciate that greatly, Molly said, trying to keep her voice even despite the joy bubbling up inside her. Then it's settled, Ben said with a nod. We'll depart with the supply wagon. In the meantime, you should rest and regain your strength. The 3 days at Fort Laramie passed quickly. Molly spent them resting, replenishing their supplies, and getting to know Ben better without the immediate pressures of survival dictating their every moment. They walked the perimeter of the fort in the cool of the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts and hopes for their futures. Ben spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of building something lasting that could be passed down to future generations. Molly shared her love of teaching and her hope to one day open a school of her own. On the evening before their departure, they sat together on a bench outside the officers' quarters, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. I've been thinking, Ben said after a comfortable silence, about what happens when we reach Oregon City. Molly turned to look at him, noting the serious set of his features. What about it? I meant what I said about calling on you properly, Ben began, his voice steady despite the slight flush creeping up his neck. But I find myself wondering if that's enough to express what I've come to feel these past days. Molly's breath caught in her throat. And what is it you feel, Ben? Admiration. Respect. Ben took her hand gently in his. And something deeper that I hadn't expected to feel again after Sarah died. Something that frightens me a little because of how quickly it's grown. I understand, Molly whispered. I feel it too. Ben's smile was tender as he reached up to touch her cheek. I know we haven't known each other long. But out here, time works differently. Days on the trail reveal more about a person's character than months in civilization. That's true, Molly agreed. I feel I know you better than men I've been acquainted with for years. Then may I be so bold as to hope that when I call on you in Oregon City, you might consider a future together? Ben asked, his voice low. Not immediately, we should give ourselves time to be certain, but eventually? In answer, Molly leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. It was a brief kiss, proper enough not to cause scandal if observed, but it conveyed her feelings more eloquently than words could have done. I'll consider it very favorably, she said when they parted, her cheeks flushed but her eyes clear and certain. The journey to Oregon City took 3 weeks, but with the protection of the supply wagon and adequate provisions, it was far less arduous than their earlier travels. Ben remained attentive to Molly's needs, though she grew stronger each day and required less assistance. They arrived in Oregon City on a crisp September morning, the town bustling with activity as settlers prepared for the coming winter. Molly's Uncle Henry welcomed her with open arms, his joy at her safe arrival evident in the tears that shone in his eyes. And this is the man who saved you? Henry Harrington asked, extending his hand to Ben. You have my eternal gratitude, Mr. Drake. Just did what anyone would have done. Ben replied modestly, shaking Henry's hand. Your niece is a remarkable woman. Her determination got her through as much as any help I provided. In the days that followed, Ben secured a room at the local boarding house while he prepared to travel to the Wilkes Ranch. True to his word, he called formally on Molly, bringing flowers and conversing politely with her uncle during his visits. 2 months later, on a clear November day, Molly stood beside Ben in the small church in Oregon City, exchanging vows that would bind them together as husband and wife. Her uncle gave her away, beaming with pride, and the entire town turned out to celebrate the union. Are you sure about this? Ben whispered as they stood together at the church doors, preparing to depart for the Wilkes Ranch that would now be their home. It's not too late to change your mind. Molly squeezed his hand, her heart full. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Even though I had to carry you half of the way to Fort Laramie? Ben teased, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Especially because of that, Molly replied, her voice soft but firm. You promised to carry me until my strength returned, and you kept that promise. Now I make you one in return to walk by your side for all the days to come, through whatever trails life may lead us down. Ben's kiss sealed their commitment, a promise of shared strength for the journey ahead, one they would make together, supporting each other every step of the way.